Hello, and welcome to the Page and Stage podcast. I'm your host, Jason Cannon. My guest this week is... Well, now this is super exciting because not only is this the debut episode of the Page and Stage podcast, but because it's a podcast dedicated to the art and craft of writing and performance, I simply can't imagine a more multifaceted, talented, and simply nice guy to be my first guest, Will Luera. Now, Will Luera is the director of improvisation at Florida Studio Theater in Sarasota, Florida. He is also the director of Big Bang Improv and the artistic director emeritus of Improv Boston. He is the co-creator of Healing Moments for Alzheimer's, a nonprofit organization that provides education, advocacy, and ministry for persons with dementia and their caregivers. Will Luera is also a conflict mediator with a focus on EDIA issues in the workplace, and he sits on the boards of Crearte Latino, a Latino-centric cultural community center in the Sarasota area, and Miss Sarasota Softball, an organization focused on empowering young women through educational athletic programs. Will Luera has performed and taught at a list of improv and comedy festivals as long as my leg, and I'm 6'3". These festivals range from Germany to Colombia, Italy to Canada, Greece to Amsterdam, Mexico to Finland, Ireland to Spain, and Saudi Arabia to Japan, not to mention almost every single United State. If you visit his website, will-luera.com, you'll see he's a comedic actor, writer, trainer, and director, and he offers a huge list of services, from entertainment consultation to curriculum consultation, one-on-one storytelling and comedy coaching, comedy workshops, comedy shows, corporate training. The list of his corporate clients is as long as my other leg, workplace mediation, personal training, as he is a certified CrossFit coach. And for you Lovebird listeners out there, Will Luera is even a wedding officiant. No, I am not making any of this up. This guy really is this cool and this brilliant when it comes to storytelling. So here we go with episode 1 of the Page and Stage podcast and my conversation with Will Luera. Sitting here with the one and only Will Luera. Thank you so much for being my first guest on this podcast.
Very happy to be here, Jason.
So we were just talking before we hopped on here about eyesight. Because I was struggling to look at my phone because I just got this new prescription for distance.
Yes.
And now I have 3 pairs of glasses. I have my distance glasses, I have my readers, and the game changer, which I didn't even know existed, were these computer glasses. So it's like in the middle,
Wow.
which changes everything for my writing, especially. I'm on the computer so much. It made such a big difference.
Oh my gosh.
And you said that you started noticing your eyesight because of your softball batting average.
Yes. I was starting to pop up more and more, and I was wondering what was going on. Why was I getting underneath the ball so much more? And I just started to realize that I wasn't seeing the ball as clearly as it was coming in. And I started to blame it on everything else. I was like, is it the twilight, the daylight, the time that we're playing? Is it the color of the ball? Am I not putting enough eye black or too much eye black? Right? I didn't know what was going on. Then eventually, after kind of testing it with a few other things, I realized, I think it's my eyesight. So I don't know if where you got your glasses, if they have special softball glasses or sports glasses.
That needs to be, if it's not a thing, I think you just had your $1 million idea. The thing I wanted to start with was you and your family do this amazing thing where, one, you're all world travelers extraordinaire, but you have this system in place where you are visiting every state in alphabetical order. And how did that start, and how far have you gotten?
Sure. Yeah. So it started because I was watching a travel show about 15 years ago, right before my oldest daughter, Olivia, was born. And I can't remember who the host was, but I do remember the graphic that I was looking at. And it was showing the state of Texas. It was putting France, the whole country of France, inside of Texas. And it said all of France fits inside of Texas. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And what jumped out at me was that if you go to Texas, you're not going to make it a special deal out of it. I mean, you might go look for a restaurant. I'm going to go see the Alamo, whatever, right? But we kind of pick one or two things. But if you go to France, it's going to be a big deal. You're going to really plan this thing out.
You're going to make your checklist and hit all the things and do your research. And
yeah. And so I said, you know what? Why don't we treat the states like that? Why don't we treat them as if they are countries? And then, how do I pick that? We still lived in Boston at the time. I'm like, so how do we pick this? I'm like, well, the easiest ways go through them alphabetical order. And I went to the list, and the first one on the list was Alabama. And I actually, at first I was like, oh, well, I never thought about traveling to Alabama.
Right.
But in a way, that was a great way to start. You never thought about this. And now you have to treat Alabama as if you're going to another country.
Talk about testing the theory. Like,
right.
What a great beta test for this idea.
Yes. Yeah. And sure enough, I mean, it was like a 5-day trip, and it was not enough to do everything we wanted to do in Alabama. And one of my favorite things I remember, it was early Facebook, but I put it out on Facebook. Then my friend connected me with a friend of hers that lives in Alabama who loves Alabama.
Okay.
And this woman sent me a list of like 20 amazing things to do. And it was great. It was a great way to start it off. And since then, having a second kid, it kind of affects your schedule.
Well, of course.
But the last one we did, which was a year and a half ago, was California. And that one was epic.
Well, that's a huge state. I
yes.
mean, talk about France fitting in Texas. I mean,
yes.
what's going to fit in California?
Oh, my God. We did so much, and we loved it. Very memorable. So Colorado is on deck. And then it picks up pace, because then it's Connecticut and Delaware, 2 small ones.
You can knock those out in a weekend.
Yeah, exactly. And then for the one after that, we don't have to drive. The 2 after that, we don't have to drive much, because it's then Florida and Georgia.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Backyard. Alphabetical probably doesn't always lend itself to geographical ease.
Right.
How did you do Alaska?
Alaska was a tough one. I mean, we were really trying to do a road trip. We were like, okay, if we fly into Vancouver or Seattle, I mean, it would have been 50 hours of driving.
Yeah.
Just because there's no direct way to get around. So we decided to do a cruise for that one.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we found a cruise that left out of Seattle, hit a few different stops, and then before coming back down to Vancouver.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you count that trip to Seattle as your Washington, or no, that's just ancillary?
Yeah, that's ancillary. Exactly.
And when you travel by yourself, you don't count those either?
Those don't count either.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes people ask me, like, if I just drop into the state, does that count? I'm like, nope, it's got to be a planned trip.
Has to have an itinerary?
Exactly, yep.
I have to come back with a magnet?
Yeah, you're right, yeah. And it's funny, like, I've done that, I've applied that same principle to now locally. Mm-hmm. Like, so we last year, we went, I was like, okay, what are the towns? We actually did this in Massachusetts as well. But now I applied to Florida. I'm like, what are the towns in Florida? The first one alphabetically is Alachua. I had no reason to go to Alachua. I put it out on Facebook. 2 friends of mine are like, I'm from there.
Yeah.
Here are a bunch of things to do. And so,
wow.
Yeah.
Sounds it's kind of a mindset shift.
Yeah.
That you're engaging with there. Like, from the very beginning, don't just think of it, it's just Texas. No. Mm-hmm. What if we'd never been?
Right.
How would we approach it if we had to get our passport stamped?
Right.
Right. What's the energetic or like spiritual lift you'd get from thinking, ooh, it's a trip to somewhere new and exotic?
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny. I think that's part of, not to segue into like the more theatrical stuff.
I'm setting you up.
Yeah,
it was a softball. I thought you might say
it. I love it. Yeah, it's, I think how improvisation, then the practice of improvisation has changed the way that I think, the way that I approach everyday life is like, you want to find the joy of every little moment, of every little place that you go to, or every big place, right? And you want to surprise yourself. You constantly want to surprise yourself.
That is kind of the exercise of improv, is just being so in the moment, of not attaching to what the outcome has to be.
Right.
We're going to get way more into that, I'm sure, but let's talk a little bit about how you got into improv, because I find, I'm lucky, I happen to know some of this story, but you were kind of a quantum physics, science, math, computer guy to start before theater and improv kind of got their hold on you. Talk just a little bit about the nutshell of that origin story of this superhero improver.
Sure. So yes, I went to Boston College with the intention of being a physics, computer science double major. That was my goal. And my senior year in high school, before I went to Boston College, I got a taste of theater. Every fall, they would put an ensemble show that would basically be an opportunity to showcase all the seniors who wanted to do theater, right? And so this was The Wiz. They did The Wiz, and every theater student who was a senior, or every senior who wanted to do theater at one point, got to be in the show. And I had like a small chorus role, but I got to do theater at my high school. It was great. But it was enough to it was a small bite of that bug that we all talk about. And I was like, oh, I really like that. I want to do this again. Didn't really do it for the rest of my senior year in high school. I did some small like open house performances, but nothing big. Went to college. I started to get into the routine. Theater was not part of my routine until the spring of my freshman year. Then I was like, I think I want to give it a try. And I saw that everybody was prepping for auditions. I knew nothing about what collegiate level auditions were all about. I did not have a monologue. I did not have any sort of like resume or anything put together. I just showed up and I saw what you needed. And I was like, this is not for me. And so I walked away. And I'm walking back up to my dorm. And as I'm walking up, there's a flyer outside of one of the dorms that says auditions tonight, no experience necessary. Right?
You're like, sold.
Yes, exactly. And I believe one of the other things, it also said no monologue necessary. And I was like, all right, let me go into that. I walked in and it was a improvised murder mystery show. It was a group on campus at Boston College that did these improvised murder mysteries. And it was like a bunch of like role playing, board game playing, really smart kids who weren't part of the theater crowd.
Right.
They weren't part of the comedy crowd, but they just wanted to do shows.
Right.
And so I auditioned. I nailed the audition. I remember having a lot of fun. And then I was cast. And I was suddenly accepted into this group.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of it. And that got me started. And I always say that I was for the next 4 years, 3.5 years, that was my life at Boston College, was doing that. I eventually started getting pulled into the scripted theater department as well. I was being brought in as like a improv expert for their classes.
Right.
All of that started to happen. I started to do shows. I was in 12 Angry Men. I was in The Diary of Anne Frank. I was in Evita. I was in a bunch of different shows. And so I started to live that life as well. But most importantly, as we both noted, I was studying physics at the same time.
Right. Right.
And I hear this more and more from many of my peers, is that there was like a fuse. It got fused together. My ideas on improv and my ideas of physics, because they were both being put into my head at the same time.
Yeah.
They both just sort of got fused into one idea, which eventually helped me build my professional improv career.
Right. And let's dive into that a little bit, because we could talk short form, long form, musical, all this stuff. But the thing you're kind of like world renowned for is free form.
Yes.
Which is kind of your theory of everything improv, right? It's kind of your Stephen Hawking take on this fusion you're talking about between physics and improv. Talk about the manifestation of that idea and how you work that out on stage to create this free form thing.
Sure. So in the late 90s, I was just right after Boston College, right at the beginning of my improv career. I was having these, this sounds weird to say about improv, but I was having these visions of shows that I was picturing in my head.
Visions, like dreams,
dreams or daydreams, they just were popping into my head. I was envisioning a blank stage where, as you would walk onto the stage, whatever you needed would appear for you. Like, and I'm talking like you're doing an improv scene, you need something, it's there, right? And you can go and you can put yourself anywhere. There's no limitation, like the limitation of certain storylines or games. You can put yourself anywhere and it emerges. And back before like green screens became popular in movies, as you remember, there used to be blue screens.
Yeah.
So my first improv team outside of Improv Boston was called Blue Screen.
Oh. Okay.
And it was this whole idea of like, whatever you want to happen on stage will happen. So if you want to fly, we will make you fly. And the way we would do that is that we had a support ensemble that would be dressed all in black, that would come in and like lift you up and like do all these things. So anyway, so like in my brain, like that was like the first sort of like anything is possible. And this came straight out of like Big Bang Theory, like the actual Big Bang, not the TV show, right? Like that, like at the beginning, before that explosion, anything is possible. And that's the way that I wanted to treat the improv stage.
Yeah.
The other thing that was happening in my brain is also the unified theory of everything, right? Of like finding the commonalities of astrophysics, like big planetary objects, right? And then quantum physics, so stuff that's happening at a subatomic level, and like trying to find the parallels between all of that. And so then in my brain, what started to happen was like, what are the similarities between short form, right? These 30-second to 3-minute scenic games, and long form, these 30 to 60-minute performances. How do we tie all that together?
Yeah.
And then that's where this idea of freeform my idea of freeform started to emerge. And I say my idea because the term is used elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
But my idea of freeform started to come out from this thought of unifying all of this.
Yeah. That basically any game or any long form modality is available at any moment to pivot into, drop into, channel change into, whatever kind of the story is asking for, you can just give.
Yes, exactly. And I, to this day, I mean, I enjoy performing it. I just did it the other day in Tampa. And my favorite comment is that when people see it, they're like, wow, that looks like a lot of fun, which it is. But they give me this comment that I've heard in many different countries. And they say, like, you're performing the way my brain is thinking. Because I think everybody's mind is already thinking about multiple possibilities when you're watching improvisation.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we're just sort of writing those possibilities, right? Just like, if you want to talk about the multiverse and all of that, we're just writing all those different possibilities and seeing where it takes us.
There's kind of this wonderful dual comment that gets handed out by the audience often, that after an improv show, one of the highest compliments is, it looked like you were rehearsed.
Yeah, right.
Whereas when you do a scripted play and you come out, the comment can be, that looks like it was just happening.
Yeah.
I can't believe that was rehearsed.
Yeah,
It's like, it's almost like the exact opposite.
That is so funny. Yeah.
And you're kind of tapping into that with what you're saying, that as I'm watching improv, it's, it's the classic circus without a net, right? It's watching the car race. When's the crash going to happen? Or when's the fight going to break out in the hockey ring?
Yes.
There's almost, we go because of the danger of no script.
Yes.
And then we are enthralled when it feels scripted, because I think the reason it feels scripted, and you can tell me if I'm way off on this, is because when the actors are jamming in improv and spinning hot, there's no lack of commitment. And it's that complete commitment and willingness to be in the moment that almost makes it look scripted, because it's how we live our lives.
Yes, yeah. That's a great way of putting it. Thank you. Yeah, and whenever we hit that flow state with each other, when we're in that moment of like all parts of our body listening, but also we're accepting and we're listening and we're giving. Like we're doing all of these things at once. It feels like magic. It feels like it must have been planned, because no one could be that simultaneously generous, right, and inspired. Like we it's hard, I think, for the outside eye to see that.
You mentioned as we were coming in that improv like changed you as a human.
Yeah.
Changed the way you interact in the world. I'm guessing it probably impacts how you have a relationship with your wife or with your kids or with your coworkers, your friends. Talk a bit more about when you say improv changed you as a human, almost on sounds like molecular level.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I often will say, like I do after 30 years of doing this, that there was a way for something to change you genetically. I feel like improv has changed me on a genetic level, because it's one of the things that it's done is it's made me curious about everything and anything in the world. Like I'm just eternally curious. I want to keep learning, and I feel like that's part of what keeps me feeling young. That's what keeps me alive. Like the thriving. I have this want to just keep learning. And I see some of my students here in Sarasota that are now in their 80s, 90s, and I see that same spirit in them.
Yeah.
Like they just want to keep learning, right? Another thing that I think it's changed is the being generous, right? And just sort of like whether it is generous with your time, whether it's generous with your attention, sometimes generous on a superficial level with money or something. But you want, what I have found is that most people want to be listened to, right? And they really want to be heard. And so when I say generous, that's what I mean. It's like I want to make sure that I give you my time and full attention. And that's another way that it's changed me. And I would say a third one is understanding my sense of humor and understanding how to use my sense of humor, right? And like the art of like timing, of good timing, and how to lighten the mood, right? And how to like deliver a note or deliver feedback, but then lighten the room so that we could all process that feedback effectively. And I use it all the time, whether it is in a theater class that I'm running or my daughter's softball team that I manage, that I coach. It's like I'll give feedback, but then I'll make it lighthearted so that we process it a bit easier.
You mentioned flow state. I love that term. Part of the discipline of improv is that once it's done, you got to let it go.
Right.
You can never recreate And there's kind of danger in that, and trying to get back to, oh, we had this joke that worked 2 weeks ago, or this character that I always want to go to because it always gets a laugh. But the discipline really of releasing what just happened, because that's the point.
Yeah.
Right? That being said, are there some flow state moments that you remember? Like, because this podcast, we want to focus on story, right? We're focusing on the power of story to hook us and teach us and open us up. So I have to imagine there's a few scenes or characters that have stuck with you, even though you've had to let them go.
Yep.
I'd love to hear about one or two of those.
Yeah, there was one that I did. This was in Amsterdam, and probably one of my favorite improv shows that we've ever done. And this was myself, my friend Paul, and my friend Dave.
Was this through Big Bang? I'm sorry.
This is through Big Bang.
So you have a group even called Big Bang.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, these ideas definitely permeate all through my life. And so this is through Big Bang. We're in Amsterdam, and we were told that we had a 10-minute window to do a preview of our bigger show.
Oh.
And so it was like opening night at a festival. They're like, you get a 10-minute preview.
Improv preview?
Yeah, an improv preview. Isn't that weird? Yeah. And so we come in, and we had this idea of, and it was mostly because of how the space was set up and the way the audience, the relation of the stage to the audience, that we had this idea of, okay, let's just play, let's do improv scenes, but the goal is to not let Paul touch the floor. And that's all. That's the only thing we did. And Paul was very, very light. I mean, he was like my height, but about 50 pounds lighter than me. Very light. Yeah. And so the goal was, we're going to do our improv show, but you can't touch the floor. That's the only directive we gave ourselves. And we entered this state of like play where we were weaving in and out of scenes, never letting Paul touch the floor, eventually using the audience. And then
he crowd surfed?
He crowd surfed. we brought him, once the audience understood the rules. And that's a big part of the Big Bang play, is that show the audience the rules. Don't teach it to them. Show it to them, and then they will play. And so once they understood the rules, we never said he's not going to touch the floor. They just saw it. Then once we brought Paul to the audience crowd surfed him up 30, 40 rows, and then crowd surfed them back.
Oh my God.
And at that point, now we're in flow state with the audience, all on the same page, right? And then eventually all the other improvisers watching, that they were going to do their previews, they join us. And then, so now it's become this huge thing. And that for me was like one of those moments, like magical moments that, I look back at that show and I'm like, yeah, we had the whole room in that flow state. Yeah.
And talk about, again, the generosity. I mean, other teams coming out and supporting a different team.
Yeah.
But again, talk about this. The danger, with the temptation ever there to then say, hey, let's do that thing where we don't let Paul touch the ground again. Did that ever happen again?
We never did it again.
Never did it again.
We never did it again. And there's this, in my level 6 classes, at that point, at level 6, you make up your own warm-ups. I teach you the skills on how to make up warm-ups, but then you have to make them up. And after each warm-up, and this happens for 8 weeks, you have to make up 3 warm-ups. So that's 24 new warm-up games you make up. But after every one, you have to say, you name it first. So you name it something like, all right, the name of that one was Coffee Time. And then we all say it, Coffee Time. And then we all say it together, and it will never be played again.
Oh my God.
And we throw it away, and it's gone. And it's scary. It is scary for those students to be like, how are we going to sustain this for 8 weeks? But they do. It's never failed. In the 10 years that I've had that specific exercise, there's always, they'll always live out. I do give everyone an asterisk. I will say, if you really liked Coffee Time or whatever, you can do it again, but you're not going to do it in this room. It's not allowed in here.
When you go teach your own level 6 class
exactly.
today.
Yeah, exactly. Go teach Coffee Time to your improv troupe.
Oh, that's almost cruel, Luera. Like, you're going to name it and then kill it. It's like you're on the farm. Yeah. Don't name the pig.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Jason, and we'll get right back to the show, but I wanted to let you know that Page and Stage is way more than this podcast. If you go check out pageandstage.art, that's pageandstage.art, you'll find a weekly newsletter full of tips, tricks, encouragement, and inspiration for storytellers of all stripes. You'll also find the online bookshop for Ibis Books, which is the publishing wing of Page and Stage. And if you're working on your play, novel, memoir, or speech, you can even set up some one-on-one story coaching with me. Again, that's pageandstage.art. And now, back to my conversation with Will Luera. You had mentioned it a few minutes ago about understanding your own sense of humor better. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because you do improv in Spanish, you've done improv in I don't even know how many different countries by this point. And you just talked about an audience accepting and understanding the rules.
Yeah.
Are there differences in improv, in storytelling of this type, between different languages, cultures, audiences? This is a gigantic question,
Sure.
but the thrust of it is, does sense of humor change based on where you are, who you're with, who's listening?
Yes, yeah, great question. The first lesson I had in this was, I think it was 2004 or 5, was the first international or outside of North America show that I did. And this was in Puerto Rico. We got invited to do improv down there in Spanish. And we all came in, very cocky Americans, right? And doing our improv show. And we do our show and we're getting crickets. We're getting nothing from the audience. It was so bad that audience had these little like clown nose type things. And if they didn't like the show, they threw them at the cast. And then if the whole audience gets in on it, then you're out. It's like a way of like, you get that
the
hook, yeah.
The gong.
The gong, exactly. I mean, we got that and we still had like 3 more shows to do. This was like a week. So we went back, we watched the other shows that night, went back to our hotel and we processed what had just happened. And the one takeaway we got was like everybody else was so physical. Like everybody was like playing inanimate objects or playing animals or large, big emotions, etc. And of course they were. I mean, you look at Spanish and Latin television and you see that it is caricatures. It's huge characters.
Or it's caricatures to us. It
To us,
feels like it to us.
Right, exactly. They and like the way that TV is played, like big expressions, and you hold big expressions, right? Almost clownish in a way, right?
Yeah.
And so we were like, we got to do that. That's what we got to do. So next show, we did that. And we'll never forget, Paul, again, comes up in this one because he took a big risk at one point. It was a scene that takes place on a beach. And he came out walking like a crab. And he says the word cangrejo, cangrejo. He's saying crab, crab. Audience cracked up. And then at that point, we're like, oh, there it is. Now we heard it. We're like, oh, they like that. A, they like to hear us struggling with the language.
Right.
But B, they like this big movement. And then that's what I learned also, that American improvisation tends to be very static. Yeah, very cerebral, mental, a lot of wordplay.
Yeah.
Right. And this happens a lot in also like in Europe, English-speaking countries in Europe, it's a lot of wordplay and really try to outwit the other person. Whereas in other countries, it's a little different. Latin American countries, I would say like a lot of the Romance languages, physicality. I mean, look at the French improvisers, right? Lots of physicality. And then when I went to Asia, it was a whole other thing. And now at that point, I had learned when you go talk to the producers, ask them, what do your audiences like? And more importantly, what is off limits?
Of course.
Yeah.
Cultural taboos or expectations or,
Yep. Like going to China, knowing like, just keep it, nothing. You can't do government scenes in China.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to maybe hide it in other things. But you in Saudi Arabia, try to stay away from religion. Right. And so there's a lot of, but you learn that, you kind of put it in your head and then but it's the same thing like here in the States. If you have kids in the audience, you put that filter on your head. You're like, right. There are kids in the audience. So it's just a little management of certain filters that you develop over time.
Filters, channel changing, whatever metaphor works for you.
Yeah.
That's a perfect lob into what I wanted to ask you next, which is, you mentioned you'd gotten into scripted theater too, but you also teach sketch. I know you've taught storytelling. I know you're dabbling in stand-up comedy.
Yes.
In terms of kind of shifting between those different modes of storytelling, what have you found are the key differences for you, both process-wise and in terms of audience expectation? Like if you're going to do a scripted play versus an improv show versus a stand-up comedy, like for you, how do you have to prepare to meet that audience in that new storytelling context?
Sure. And maybe I'll go from what I'm most experienced with to least experienced with.
Right.
So for me, like I break down all of my comedy into 2 parts. Like I'll say like there's the comedy of surprise, right? Where there's unexpected twists and turns. Maybe like there's illogical reality, right? Something that we don't really, as humans, we're like, this is not something that I'm familiar with. So there could be that, right? And then on the other side, there's the comedy of like the resonance or the cathartic, where you see it and you know it. You're like, I know this. I know what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And I'm almost feeling a catharsis from seeing something that I'm so familiar with being played out on stage. And so with those two things, like in improv, I've gotten to the point now where I could recognize both laughs. There's a laugh of like, there's a different laugh. It's a very sharp, like very, almost like a shock, right, laugh. And it's like it spikes quickly, and I'm like, okay, this is like out of surprise, and they like this reality we've created. So let's just play in this world where penguins are starting a revolution in the zoo, right? For some reason, the audience really digs this. Let's go there, right? As opposed to the more deeper. Like, and it doesn't spike as long. It's a slower burn because it's a scene about an uncomfortable first date, right? And the audience is kind of laughing at like, oh yeah, yep, I know this. I've been here.
Right.
And you hear different pockets of the audience laughing because they're connecting with different parts of it. And I often have to tell my casts, like, neither weighs more than the other. Neither is valued more than the other. You just got to know them both. I'll sometimes hear my slow burn, actors that were in a slow burn scene being like, yeah, but the other one was funny. I'm like, it was a different funny.
Yeah.
And you got to appreciate the trouble with the bass. You need both of them. So that's in improv. Probably after that, then it would be sketch. Now for me, in sketch, very similar, right? We have surprise versus cathartic and or resonant comedy. But for me, there's two methods that I usually go about it. The first one is, you talked earlier about an improv scene that was like this, lightning, right? And what I try to do is capture it in a bottle and be like, that improv scene was really good. How do we contain it and then replay it and do it again and again, right? Because it was such a good scene that had such a valuable message that's now scripted out and turned it into a sketch.
So that's great for the writing process side of this. Is so if sometimes you do clock that improv scene, there's something in there,
yes,
that we can curate into a repeatable sketch form.
Right.
We can capture it by writing it down.
Yes. And it's usually when the improv scene carries a little bit more weight, where, okay, yeah, it's surprising, or yes, it's a cathartic improv scene, but it's also speaking to something topical, something universal, right? Something that has deeper meaning. So when I see those, I'm like, that's a good scene. Let's try to hold on to that. Let's flush it out, try to turn it into a sketch. Right. So that's where the sketch writing comes in for me, and how it plays these two types of comedy. Then I go into now let's go to storytelling. Storytelling has become one of my most popular classes now. I teach it all the time. I'm getting constantly brought in. It's from what I'm understanding, it's an art form that is going through a revival right now.
Yeah. And to be clear, this storytelling, it's less fiction and more kind of memoir based, autobiographical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And so my goal is to have you find a true story, and polish it up, massage it until it's something that can be presented to audiences.
Yeah.
Right. And when it's presented to an audience, the name of the class is comedic storytelling, but I tell everybody, I'm like, it's not that it's a full comedy. There could be one part that's funny. Right. But the rest of it could have a lot of heart and, help us feel a lot of other things as well. This past Sunday, I had a student who the whole thing was a memory about her husband, but then it ended on a joke. And the joke had the audience laugh, and it was a great way to release the tension. But same thing. It's like, what is the story going to go in a surprising way and have a surprise twist that none of us ever, no one in the room has ever experienced this. Right. Getting lost in a foreign country where you don't know the language. That was one of the stories I heard. And everybody, everybody's like, what is going to happen? Like, no one had ever been to the country that this person was talking about. So everybody was on the edge of their seats. Then another story that we heard was about a student whose her car was running out of gas. Oh. And we've all know. And at the end of the night, everybody told her, like, I've been there. Right. And seeing it go to E, seeing the light come on, and the panic that starts to set in. And she goes into turning off the radio, turning off the AC, trying to conserve it. We've all been there, right? And the other great thing I like about storytelling is that it also helps me in this idea of reading the room, which I think is one of those very important, almost unteachable skills. But it's like reading the room, and that can help you initiate a true story.
Yeah.
Right? Like kind of seeing where is this audience and what kind of story will resonate with them. And then stand up, which is my most recent one. Now this is, I'm still learning the way. I've gotten a lot of great feedback. I finally got to do what they call a feature set, which is 15 minutes.
Whoa!
Yeah, so I got up to that now. But it's funny, I tell my improvisers when they're on stage, I'm like, slow down.
Yeah.
Enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
I give myself that note and stand up.
Yeah.
Because I'm like,
the same way.
Yeah.
Oh,
But my stand-up is also like I hit both sides. I'm like, I'm going to share a true story, then I'm going to give you some like, dumb observations.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
I've had the exact same experience in stand-up. I think it's because there's that fear of if you hit a punchline and leave space for the laugh, and they don't.
I think you're right. Yeah.
There's almost nothing worse. So you keep going, and you subvert your own laughter so that you don't have to experience the lack of laughter. That's been my experience.
No, but I think you're right. It's so funny. Like in every other improv, sketch, stand up, I'm able to hear the audience.
Breathe.
Ride it. Yeah. Stand up. And I went back to watch a video. I could hear the audience laughing, and then I just keep talking. Right. And I'm like, Will, what are you doing?
You give yourself the note, and then you lighten it up.
Yeah.
So you take the note.
Yes, exactly.
Really quick to focus on the writing process a little bit. Back on sketch,
Yep.
Do you tend to write, because the way it sounded was that it's kind of almost a writer's room. Do you tend to write sketch like in a silo, or do you do it sort of almost devised with a group? Or what is your writing process for sketch? Do you do a draft by yourself and bring it to a group and then kind of rewrite on its feet? Or
one thing I've accepted about myself as a writer, and I learned this maybe 10, 12 years ago, is that I'm a much better premise person. Like I'm really good at pitching premises, but the actual execution is where I still need work. And I know this because in a few sketch shows that I was a part of, several 15, maybe almost 20 years ago, I would notice that in a show of say 15 sketches, right? It's got 15 sketches of it in it. 7 are maybe ideas I pitched. 0 were sketches I wrote. Right. And so, and I've tried in the past, like writing my own ideas, but what I've realized is that I'm really good at pitching them, and then somebody else writes them. I'm also really good at giving notes to somebody. So like if they come in with an unpolished sketch, I could see what we could tweak to make the comedy shine.
Yeah.
And so going back to your question, I like working with a team. I like the idea of myself or somebody else or someone on the team being the head writer, right? And all of us putting ideas into the pot. But this is tough for a lot of folks, like the ego involved in giving up your ideas and sharing them with a group. And then ultimately maybe your idea getting cut.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy.
The collective.
Yes. Yeah.
A few years ago, you talked to me about how there was like this, and you're going to be able to fill in these gaps because I'm remembering just impressions, but it was almost like an entire little village built for people with dementia, and everyone else in the village, all the workers, were improvisers, or they'd been trained to improvise and create this world for people who have really severe memory loss to just be and not like be told they were wrong or be reminded of what they should think, but improv being used as, I don't even say therapy, but as a method of dealing with, especially for caretakers or family members taking care of someone with dementia, that improv was becoming this tool to use to help both the people suffering from dementia to not feel so much anxiety and agitation, and to help those taking care of them also not feel agitation or loss or anger at their loved one for not remembering their name. Or for, can you talk a little bit about how improv is being used and what that model is I even brought up? You're going to know more about that than I do.
Sure. So I'll backtrack a little bit and say, again, I keep using 15 to 20 years, but in my brain, everything was 15 to 20 years ago.
Yeah, you're at that age.
It was probably more at this point, maybe closer to 20 to 25 years, where I had a student who was taking improv classes from me at Improv Boston at the same time that her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Happened at the same time. And what she started to share with me, and she was also in theology school at Harvard. And so what she started to share with me was that, I've started to use what we do at improv classes with my mother. And, whenever, and her observation was, when I see my mother with her caretakers at the facility that she's at, they would deny what she was saying. They would try to correct her. And I'm speaking as her now. She would say, my mother would then go back into her state of grief or whatever she was feeling about the loss. She was re-experiencing loss over and over.
Right.
And my student was basically saying, well, I didn't want her to feel that anymore. So I just went with it. Right. And then
the classic improv, yes.
And basically, yes. Yeah. And then from that came a method of teaching these same tools to other caregivers. And so we actually went around touring all over New England and going to different conferences showing caregivers, both professional caregivers, but also at-home caregivers, like how you can do this, right? And then to the point where we were getting quite a bit of recognition. There's a woman, Lisa Genova, who wrote the book Still Alice, eventually an Academy Award-winning movie.
Right.
And so she went with us. She was a good friend of mine as well. This is before she wrote any of that. So we were all working together, and it really took off. And unfortunately, like she had to go, she moved to Iowa. I ended up moving to Florida. And so we couldn't collaborate, but we still continued to work on this. We still had our passion. She continued from Iowa, going to conferences. Once I got here, I had more direct access to people of that higher age.
Of course, Florida. Yeah.
Right. And so then what I started to do is I started to say, okay, well, I could continue to do the same sort of work with caregivers, but now I could also start to come up with exercises for the actual patients or the actual residents of these facilities. And so I started to create these exercises, these workshops called brain games that go between 30 to 45 minutes, right? And they all focus on just what is the term that is used is cognitive fitness, right? So short-term memory building, long-term memory building, pattern recognition, and we do it all through improv games. And it started out with just one or two facilities. Now on a weekly basis, there's about 6 different places I go to.
Wow.
So I'm constantly just driving around and teaching these workshops. There is one place here locally in Sarasota, I believe it originated in Baltimore. Now they're a nationwide chain, that they're called Town Square. And it's meant to be like this little town. You walk in and there's like storefronts, there's a mechanic shop, there's a theater, a diner, etc. And it's meant to help them go back to the time when they were comfortable. And so, and kind of feel comfortable in that spot and help to maybe even encourage or inspire memories.
Right.
So when I go in there, I make sure to tap into where they're at through a series of different exercises.
Yeah.
And everybody else that works there is also just as playful. That's become a huge passion of mine. I've started to see that the importance of that kind of work. And I've actually even started to become a little bit more sensitive to the idea of ageism, which I think is very, it's very prevalent. And unfortunately, I think it's starting to get normalized. You hear it a lot in the news right now, like just an angle of attack is people's age.
Yeah.
And we've just started to just accept that as normal. And I think that that's something that I want to advocate against, because I get to work with students that are up to 106 years old.
Yeah.
And yes, they have slowed down a bit, but that does not mean that they're not just as intelligent and have as much to contribute.
Yeah. I got to interview lots of people a few years ago for some plays, some gerontology plays. And one of my favorite guys, Joe, he was 101 and he drove his 92-year-old girlfriend to the coffee shop to meet me for the interview.
That is great.
When he was 98, he declared his candidacy for like local office.
This was
one of those guys that he told a story of, he went to get his driver's license renewed when he was 97, and he came out and he has this perplexed look on his face. Yeah. And his girlfriend's like, "What's wrong, Joe?" And he's like, "They just extended my license for 6 years." He's like, do they not understand? Like, he was so just real about it. And like, I still want to drive. I might drive slower. But to your point, that this idea that once you hit a certain age, suddenly it's a pejorative, or you're automatically less than, is just really, you're not meeting the individual where they are.
Right. I mean, and just like we were talking about earlier, okay, I might need glasses now,
exactly.
But it doesn't mean that I can't hit the softball.
Oh, you brought it all the way back. I see what you're saying. I like these new glasses. So this is fascinating, because people tend to think of like improv as it's whose line is it anyway? It's always funny. It's always meant for comedic value. And you're bringing so much different value from improv into other parts of life. So we've just talked about people with dementia, caregivers, but you're also using your improv and storytelling, not just cognitive fitness, but in conflict mediation, and immersive work training.
Yes.
And I would love for you to talk about this a little bit. I know you did some mediation training, and it's another thing you offer now on your website that has 80, I'll tell you how to go find it, but like 87 things Luera offers. But using improv or theater or storytelling for conflict mediation and immersive work training, please just unpack that. That's
Sure.
amazing.
And I think it all goes back to also something we talked about earlier about that flow state that you enter with in improv, where you are full body listening, being inspired, and giving. Like all this is happening at the same time. That's what led me to the working with our older age neighbors, and now also into conflict mediation. And I used to be the keynote at a conference at Eckerd College, and I used to run like workshops there. And I did that for a few years until finally like the dean of their mediation training kind of just came up to me and was like, would you like to do what we do? Right? He's like, because he basically said, he's like, everything you're talking about is what we are doing in our program, but it's towards conflict mediation. And I was like, oh yeah, I would love to. And so in my spare time, I then had to, I studied up, went through their courses, and then went through their courses to train others on how to do it. But then it's a same sort of, a lot of the same work applies. The outcome is different, right? We have two people that are in conflict. Essentially, we have two people that are not listening to one another. And our goal is to come in as a third person and help them listen and hear to what the other person is saying.
It's almost literally they have two different stories they're telling.
That's right. Yeah.
And you're trying to say, actually, the once upon a time is this thing between you.
Yes, exactly. Right. Exactly. And because they have their own story. You're right. And then it's like, we're trying to get them to focus on this other story, the one that they both are a part of, that they share. And so my goal is to get them to see that, right, and meet in the middle, right, so that we could mediate this conflict and move forward together. And the upside for any business is that it is so expensive to manage conflict. The amount of hours that a manager needs to take to address conflict instead of working on the business, the amount of hours taken out of somebody's workday because they are in stress about their coworker and they're afraid to send emails, or afraid to walk by that person's desk. This starts to add up. The amount of money it costs to replace somebody because they leave out of fear, all of this money, it adds up. And so you help companies understand this. Like instead of just recycling through people, right? Or why don't we understand how to address conflict and make it productive? Because the other thing is that underneath that conflict, there's probably a larger issue with the company or the business that needs to be addressed.
Right. And conflict is the symptom, not the disease.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And then once we're able to address that, there might actually be opportunity there.
Oh yeah, for innovation, right?
Exactly. Right. Or innovation, or how to make the company more efficient.
Yeah.
Right. Et cetera. Like we could start to, if we figure that out, then everyone's going to move forward. And I'm speaking specifically to workplace mediation, but it also goes to personal mediation. Just last weekend, I had a friend wanted to take me out to coffee because they were having a problem with their roommate. And then I applied all the same principles that I do with workplace mediation, but I applied it to how to deal with his roommate. Because he was telling me, he's like, we can't even look at each other in the common living areas.
Oh, man.
And what is that going to lead to eventually?
Right.
A ruptured friendship, a difficult living situation, et cetera. So let's work through that.
And so this is also immersive work training? This conflict mediation, there's two aggrieved parties,
right?
Or, but it feels a bit more localized. But when you say immersive work training, is that like a full staff or faculty or?
So this is becoming now, this is a new thing that's come up in the last year or so. And it's starting to go like almost full circle to what I was talking about, like my visions of blue screen, of like a place where you could just be in and then it becomes that reality. So I've started to work with this company that works with child protection services here in Florida.
Oh, my goodness.
And so what they do is that they create a reality for these people to come into. So for example, this space that we're sitting in now, imagine that we had actors in place where then somebody comes in and they have to deal with the reality as if this was the situation, a situation that a child protection services agent would have to walk into.
Oh, so when you say immersive, it's like a holodeck.
Exactly.
You're creating a scenario almost for someone to walk into, and everyone knows what the story is except the person
walking in.
Oh, my
exactly. Goodness. And so there is a bridge between this and the conflict mediation work I was doing, because in the conflict mediation work, we would also do somewhat immersive
role playing
type of role.
Yeah.
Exactly. Role playing. This is full, like you're walking into a space, right? And then you're going to get, right after this, you're going to get feedback from your trainers.
And so just to get full clarity on this, the person walking in is the child protection services versus worker
Yes,
into a scenario they are likely to encounter out in the real world.
exactly.
The actors are playing family members, kids,
Neighbors,
neighbor.
exactly.
Wow.
And so this has become in the last year, these simulations have become something that I've been working in more and more, both virtual and in real life. And that is where I feel like, okay, this is now, I've started to now envision and think about where else this is applicable and how valuable this kind of training could be for any sort of job that deals with when you're not in a cubicle or behind a desk, right? But you're dealing with real life situations with moving variables,
Oh,
right?
wow.
And unexpected outcomes. How can we properly train somebody? You could go, going back to softball, you could think about taking a grounder over and over, but it's not until it actually is coming to you and all those little bounces that you actually becomes
and there's a man on third who's going to score if you muff it, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of where I feel my next level of work is going to. But it's also where, not to assume you were going to ask this question, but it's also where I think the future of improv comedy and theater, I shouldn't say comedy, improv theater, I feel like that's where it is. And that's where my head is right now, is that if I get to pursue improvisational theater further, for the last few years, not just in the last year, but the last 5 years or so, I've been thinking of like immersive is going to be where it's at. And we're getting there already with all this virtual reality stuff.
Oh, wow.
And like all the glasses, but I want to like, maybe make the glasses a part of it, but like we love escape rooms. People love escape rooms right now. So there's already, we like being in it. But now I'm thinking, I'm like, is there a way to create theater where you are in it?
Yeah, the big question is, how do you get like 100 people to immerse into one experience together with a cast crowd control?
Right, yeah.
All the logistics come into play too.
But I mean, it would probably, we would have to challenge how we think of improv theater. It might not be one stage. It might be multiple stages. It might be smaller audiences. Like, I don't know, like but I think like getting people, I'm reflecting back and thinking back about Boston College on my senior directing project.
Yeah.
We all got to do one, and everybody had to direct a scene from Shakespeare. You get to pick anyone you want. And at that point, I had I was I think a history class that I was taking about the late 20th century politics or something. Anyways, like Kennedy was in my head, and so I took sort of a Kennedy take on Julius Caesar.
Okay.
So that was going to be like and so I had everybody dressed up in that way. But the big difference I had from everybody else in my class is that the audience was around as well. They were the senators. It was in the round. And they were on their feet. I had the audience on their feet. And so everything was happening inside and within the audience. And there was a certain level of crowd control. Yeah. But everybody was in the play. And so
there's something that ties to that. I did a show, a site-specific theater, right, which kind of forces this immersive thing. I was in a show where Act 1 happened in a boxing gym. And we were up among all the heavy bags and the mirrors, and the audience could stand anywhere and walk around. Yeah. And we're doing this scene. And then we all went downstairs where there's an actual ring. And the climactic scene was me and my scene partner, Chris, and we're in the boxing ring.
Wow.
And I'm encouraging him to beat me up.
Yeah.
Right. And the audience is staying right on the ring.
Yeah.
So, now you can't black it out. You can't, like, how do you take a bow? How do you suddenly go, and the show's over?
Yeah.
But those are, people have been doing site-specific. I mean, you go all the way back to the Middle Ages with platforms, the medieval mystery cycle plays where the shows themselves would move around.
I love that.
This impulse, I think, is a universal, timeless impulse.
Yeah.
Towards that immersive experience.
And like, we're all like leading towards it again, I just referred to like the goggles and the virtual reality and all that, which I find fascinating, but there's something magical and powerful about theater that I want people up on their feet. I want people to see it in real life and not just through a lens.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
I just want to wrap up with two that tend to be kind of common questions, but I like, I'm going to put a little spin on it. So what is the best advice you've ever taken?
That I've ever taken? I can't remember the exact phrasing, but it was really important for me, where I was reminded that everyone is on their own voyage, right? Everyone is on their, it's very easy to hold a grudge or be mad or get annoyed with somebody. And I still to this day remind myself that we're all, before I even say this, yes, there are people that are just jerks. Like, there are people that they're just not good people. And that, but that aside, there are some good people that every now and then annoy you. Right? I remember I was told a few years ago, and I still very much remind myself that like everybody's on their own voyage.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're a little bit ahead of you. Sometimes they're on the same right by you. Sometimes they're behind you. Sometimes they need to take another way around.
Yeah.
They have to take the scenic route while you kind of keep moving forward. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? We honor that. We respect that. And then we wait to meet them on the other side.
That's awesome.
When they're ready.
What's the worst advice you've given?
I've learned this the hard way now. And I'm not totally free of this bad advice because I don't give it anymore, but I definitely, I think it's trapped me a few times, is to try to make everyone happy. I used to really be an advocate of that. And I'm sure I've shared it with people in different ways, maybe not those words, but I've tried to become more of an advocate for myself as well. And set boundaries and know when you can't make everyone, and that's okay. Yeah. It is okay to try not to make everyone happy. And I'm not saying like just focus on yourself, but if making somebody happy goes against your values, right, your beliefs, then maybe that's not good for you. And also, as a person who finds himself in leadership positions often, it was not a healthy way to function. I've learned over time that at least in any community that I'm a part of or in charge of, 20 to 25% of the people that I manage are going to be mad at me.
Yep. No matter what you do.
No matter what I do. And the only advice I give people is like, just make sure it's not the same 20, 25%. Like, every time. Or else then you're going to have a problem. Like, try to figure out what the issue is.
Right.
So that's, I just sort of, and once you accept that, once you know that like, okay, 1 out of every 4 people is pissed off at me, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nothing I can do.
Yeah, nothing I can do about it because everyone is on their own voyage.
Yep. Great. Well, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time today. Let everyone who's listening know what do you have coming up? Where can they find you, see you perform, take a class with you? What do you got coming up? I have
so I still have my weekly shows at Florida Studio Theater every Saturday night, and I'm teaching not as much as before because my daughters keep me pretty busy now, but I'm still teaching about twice a week on afternoons and evenings. I do a lot of one-off classes around Sarasota. But I also I'm starting to travel more and more, going back to South America in the late spring, early summer. And I'm always up for visiting. So just let me know.
Very cool. And if people have interest in the cognitive fitness or conflict mediation or this immersive training, if they have a business or want to learn more about that, where can they go to find more out?
My website, will-luera.com. Or like I tell everyone, I am at Luera, WLUERA at everywhere.
On everything?
On everything.
If you get the new Apple goggles, it's going to say W Luera on the inside.
Like literally, if you go to at Hotmail, at Gmail, at AOL, at Comcast, it'll all go to me.
They have the monopoly on Will Luera.
Yeah.
Great. Will, thanks so much. It's been, I'll speak for myself. I got to play with you on stage so many times for years, and my gratitude towards you as a human and a teacher is just boundless.
Oh, thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Page and Stage podcast. All my thanks to this week's guest, Will Luera, and to all of you out there for listening. Send me your thoughts and questions at jason@pageandstage.art. I always love to hear from you, and I'll be featuring your questions on future episodes. This podcast is built with Alitu, the all-in-one online podcasting app created by Colin and his amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. Be sure to listen next time when my guest will be Maria Shadler Luera. Yes, in a wonderful bit of kismet, my first 2 guests on the Page and Stage podcast are basically a Sarasota power couple, Will and Maria Luera. Maria is just as multifaceted and brilliant as Will. She's an actor, an operatically trained singer, a teacher, an Ayurvedic practitioner, and just recently became a first-time published author. You won't want to miss my conversation with Maria Shadler Luera. Until then, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.